All right, everyone, let us call this meeting to order. It is Thursday, October 10th. This is the Assembly Legislative Committee. Myself, Member Brawley, will be chairing. We are noticed from 11:30 to 12:50 p.m. Because we have some meaty topics to get through, but hopefully we won't use all that time. So first we're going to do introductions, and we'll turn to the agenda. So starting with Mr. Littlefield.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley. And then on the phone, we have a few folks, and reminder, folks can mute, but I'll call off the names I see on the placards here. Mr. Solt. Okay, he will be here soon, hopefully. Mr. Constant.
Here.
Mr. Martinez.
Present. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Okay, great. And Mr. Solt, just say hi when you're back. Any other members on the phone? Okay, not seeing any. And I know we are also joined in the room by Mr. Clouda from the administration, legislative services, assembly council, some folks in the back. And then we also have Heather Brakes, our state lobbyist, on the line as well. So let's turn to the agenda. We are going to, I'm going to suggest that we change the order of the agenda. So let's move any unfinished business. If folks have updates on other items, we'll put that at the end. And then under new business, I would like to take up item A after B and C. Basically, we're going to spend the bulk of our time on the legislative program, but we have a couple other items. So is there any objection to that change? Okay, not seeing any. So for both of the items, I am going to first turn to Member Bronga. So first, let's start with the project to update 2023 school funding and BSA increase joint resolution. And before you, you have a copy of a resolution that was passed last year regarding the school funding to the state. So I will turn it to Ms. Bronga.
So I do know that we have met Margot Bellamy and a group of school board members that are going to go through what we have written in last year's resolution and update items that need to get updated, and that we will meet with them after they take the first bite at it. And I don't really have much more to add to it than that, other than, the situation has not changed in our need for school funding. And reading the paper this morning, I was irritated with it, with a new complaint line or whatever that the governor has set up to, I can't remember the final cost, but, it seems like we're doing everything but addressing what really needs to happen, which is make sure we adequately fund our schools so that we have quality teachers that want to stay here and work, and students that are not in. I have a tenant that just left one of the houses that we're renting, and she's at Cassoon Elementary School with a third grade class of 33 students. And I think that's just criminal. So not much to report other than the school district is working on it first, and we will join in to help.
Okay, thank you. So maybe can you clarify kind of what the process is going to be, or because I think we're looking at a joint resolution, is that right?
So to clarify, without much clarification, we have sent an email asking the school board members that wanted to be on the committee to put in facts and figures that are specific to school district and their lack of funding or their funding needs. And then we will, and thank you to Jennifer for sending an email to them asking when they have those figures put in to get back to us, and we can meet jointly to sign on together. Are you wanting to know when we would like to present this at the assembly meeting? Those kind of
I think that's fine. I would just to give folks an idea, like when we might see this, but it sounds like you guys are early in your process, so. Yeah, I guess I'll ask, go ahead, Ms. Venaklassen, our staff.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think Member Baranga outlined it. We're in the early stages of working with the 3 school board members who are going to be updating the figures. They're working out their timeline about when they want to bring it to their board to pass, and they were going to send a draft to Member Baranga and Member Rivera as the ad hoc committee to weigh in. I expect the assembly could see it as early as late November, but depending on what the school district decides on their timeline, it might be more like December. And they're going to get back to us on that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or additional comments on this item? And folks on the phone, please just text me if you want to get in the queue. Oh, go ahead, Member Baranga.
So did we decide, is there a third? We weren't sure if there was a third person at that meeting that raised their hand for assembly and we missed them, or if it's just Member Rivera and I.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Ms. Van Klossen, if you've heard from anyone. To my knowledge, there were just 2 people on the assembly side who volunteered at the meeting on the 27th of September, but it sounds like there is room for a third.
I agree. Room for a third.
So if anyone wants to jump in, let us know.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not seeing any other comments on that. I will note that we are, of course, looking at the legislative program shortly. Education will be part of that, but I think the detail, there won't be room for the detail that is in this resolution. So we'll look for any detail. And I guess if other members have recommendations or things you would like to share back, contact sounds like the school board members, or just contact Ms. Venaklassen and she can provide that feedback. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to our next item then. So we're looking at the other resolution draft that we have before us, and I will turn again to Member Baranga to explain this one. It is the one that's out of kids' hands with assembly, or sorry, the out of kids' hands resolution. So Member Baranga.
Thanks, Chair. So this one, I can tell you, after this meeting, if there are any edits, we would be happy to take them. And after this meeting, we plan to get it loaded up for the agenda to hear on October 22nd. I believe that's the right date. And I am working on this at the request of Alaska Eating Disorder Alliance that alerted me to the fact I felt very naive to find out that the diet pills and muscle building supplements that are readily available on our shelves are not regulated by the Food and Drug, or inadequately regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. Claims that are not scientifically evidenced, plus many have been found to be adulterated with prescription pharmaceutical compounds, illegal substances such as steroids, and with these products that have something in them that we don't know about, there have been gastrointestinal impairment, tachycardia, hypertension, myocardial infarction, stroke, and severe liver damage. There's a very real link between using these products and eating disorders. And in Alaska and Anchorage, we do have a lot of young people and not so young people that have suffered from eating disorders. And I first dug in to see if we could do something in Anchorage itself, and was told that this would need to be a state regulation to try to make it so that youth could not purchase these products. We're not asking to pull them from the shelf per se, but we would like to limit who can purchase them. Other things that I've learned from working with Akita is that 28% of the teens reported binge eating behaviors in the last 30 days. And that comes from the Youth at Risk Behavior Survey. a lot of the eating disorder problems were exacerbated through COVID and have not rectified. And we have a list in the last whereas of other um, states that have taken action on it. And the name of the campaign is Out of Kids' Hands. And I want to thank Bryn Austin from Harvard, that she's the one who helped me with the draft resolution and the citations. So they have a big campaign going to try to do something about this. I think that's it.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments on this from members? Mr. Littlefield?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this forward, Member Bronga. I think it's a really good idea. I don't know if you've called out in several places where youth is mentioned, and down in line 27, it's teens. Do we need to identify the age group, or are we focusing on everything below the age of 21?
I would say that I'm in my head, I was looking at under 18, but I would be open to discussion on that.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? I don't see any on the phone. Okay, well, it sounds like we'll look for that at the on a future agenda. Oh, one more thing, Member Bronga.
So if anyone wants to also have their name on it, I would be happy to add you.
Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you. So then if there's no other comments on this, I'm not seeing any on the phone, then let's move on to our next item. So we are continuing to, this is the review 2025 program priorities draft for our legislative program. And we have a draft before us. So I will very briefly turn it over to, or very shortly turn it over to Mr. Clouda, but just to remind folks, we are working on the draft legislative program. The goal is to get this on the introduced on the agenda by the 19th of or November, sorry. And then I think we had hopes that we would vote on this on the 19th, but I think we have until really December 10th. And so I think we're looking probably at the December 3rd meeting because we want to make sure that we've chased down all of the pieces and make sure that it's in good shape. So what we're working through right now is last committee meeting, we looked at the 2024 draft. We discussed what to keep, what to change, what to remove, and really thinking hard about our top priorities. And so this new draft you'll see, and then we'll walk through it very shortly, is really just high level headers. So really the topics that we want to cover. Our goal is not to look at wordsmithing and getting into the details. We will have an opportunity to review that, but really want to look at what we're putting forward as our priorities. And then, of course, the last couple pages, we won't spend a lot of time on today, but just to point out is our district priorities, meaning all 6 assembly districts. So those are primarily capital projects. This does not reflect all of the updates that folks have been sending in on your district priorities yet, but it will. So just a reminder again to members that we want to be doing that as well. But let's back up from there for now and really focus on walking through the proposed priorities in this draft. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Clouda. Thank you for preparing this, and then we'll get into discussion about kind of where we go from here. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Brawley. We are so we have developed kind of a list of these are kind of 5 bucket areas for items that are going into our legislative program, and so we have a list that's not quite fully ready to share yet, that we're still discussing internally, that kind of fit into each of these. We do have a lot of like department level priorities where we kind of have to them against other kinds of priorities to make sure to see if they're like part of why they're they're being mulled over still. But everything that we do kind of fits into these 5 categories. You'll see that the port isn't listed, and we can come back to that. But they fall securing our energy future, safe streets and trails, and we're probably going to rework that because we use that terminology to mean something different. But it's more about a transportation related category. Strengthening a behavioral health system, which was a priority last year. Increasing housing supply and addressing homelessness, and then promoting good government. And so So the port is something, the fact that it's not one of those 5 is not because it isn't important. It's because we don't know yet if we have an ask or not. We may not have a state level ask. And so what the program may reflect is some form of an update or a little bit of information about the port, saying like, work in progress or something to communicate that we're working on the port and that we appreciate what the state has done to help us with that in the past. But we're not certain that there's an ask there yet. So each of these areas, then the energy category, and by the way, the 5 are not like prioritized in order. That's still something that we're going to work on. And then I think what we'll also do with it is we'll probably have our top 3 priorities that won't be these buckets. It'll be like specific items in them so that we can say these are our 3 top priorities. At least when we give it to the assembly to work with, that's the way that we will, that's the kind of the state that it'll be in. Energy is going to be one of those areas. Most of the asks there are not about what the state can transfer to the municipality or fund at the municipality, but it's more about the big picture stuff to do with our energy future and Cook Inlet. So things like the rail belt transmission upgrades, potential hydroelectric expansion, renewable portfolio standards possibly. And so these are fairly big picture items where we're working with the South Central Mayor's Energy Coalition and with government affairs folks at NSTAR, Chugach, and in organized labor, where there's a lot of convergence around a set of priorities as far as energy goes. And so we want those to be reflected in our program as well. The streets and trails one is, what's handy about this, I think, is that a lot of the asks last year and a lot of the ones that are likely to come through the assembly are likely to be road and transportation related. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a heading for transportation. Also topics like around the road safety corridors and funding of snow removal on state roads. We want to make sure that, as we do our part for snow removal, that the state also does theirs, especially for the roads within our boundaries. The behavioral health one is mostly about backing the work of partner organizations. So Crisis Now is, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a kind of emergency behavioral health response system that needs sort of a package of legislative items in order to become a functioning program. This is something that we think is really important, something the city has a lot of stake in. And increasing our housing supply and addressing homelessness. So things like gap financing or patient capital that could be made available through ADA or AHFC to build more homes. Potentially this one about last year, there was the blighted property tax that may or may not go in there. Infrastructure funding to encourage housing. And then I have a question mark here. Homelessness asks, we don't want to ask for shelter funding like we did last year. We've been advised that that's not the way to go. But I think that we're still keeping the door open if there's a homelessness ask that we have of the state. I think that would be something that would be very important to us, but we have to be very strategic about how we do that. The good government bucket is admittedly a little bit of a kind of miscellaneous category, but it includes things like the community assistance program, getting funding through that, which would be something that would have a lot of upside for the municipality. The standing priorities of things like a defined benefit system for public employees, and some measure of increasing the BSA, I think, and tracking the school district's priorities, I think, is something that's pretty important to us. I know that election reform one is something that came forth from last year from the assembly from the program that sounds like it's important and wanted as well. So that's in there. As well. So that's kind of where the priorities are now. We are still kind of discussing and prioritizing internally, and we do have a fairly long list of departmental kinds of requests that we're kind of vetting and thinking about as far as what might be included in there and how to craft good strategy around those. But again, like I said, there will be a port, some level of a port update, and I think Member Johnson has already kind of drafted some language that we might be able to use for that. And then also that we probably want to pull out 3 specific items rather than having like these kind of topic areas, and we'll call those our top 3 or so priorities when we pass this along to the assembly.
All right, thank you very much. So again, folks, if you want to get in the queue, please just text me or speak up if I'm not seeing it. So I think the way to approach this is we have these 5 topics, and I think it'd be helpful to go and get kind of comments or take a look at each of them. But I think before we do that, let's talk about kind of the overall, because you said basically the strategy is we've got these 5 topic areas. We've carried forward a lot of things from prior years because this is our priorities. But then there'd be maybe, a couple specific asks. So I guess I want to get kind of members' thoughts on that. Are these the right, before we get into what those topics are, does this feel like the right approach? Do we have thoughts about what the top ask should be? And then, of course, you'll see here, we had the port as our number one priority last year. So I want to call that out specifically, that's not, it's not listed that way this year. But just if we can get some folks' thoughts on this, the top level, really. So these 5 things. And I see Mr. Constant in the queue, so we'll start there. And Mr. Constant.
Sure, thank you, Nolan. I know there's a conversation brewing about overall strategies on tax abatement. I want to put a marker that I'm going to be pushing for a review and a request to add first-time home buyer loan recipients as potential beneficiaries of tax abatement.
Through the chair, Member Constant, thank you. Yeah, we have spoken about that. I think we should talk about that one a little more as a priority to include. I'll follow up with you about it.
Yeah, and I think that falls under the housing policy bucket.
Okay, other comments on these top level priorities? Mr. Littlefield?
Thank you, Anna. I have a question. Can you elaborate what we're going to do with fund maintenance of state roads and fund snow removal of state roads? Their budget's right around $60 million for their roads. Now, if we eliminate all of the ones like the Minnesota, and GNC, all the highways. So we're trying to incorporate that funding of those roads that are absent of their priority ones. So there's a lot out there. Can you elaborate, please?
Sure, through the chair. I think this one is still something we do need to flesh out a little bit and make sure that we have all the correct context. I did understand, and there's probably someone else who has a little bit more background on this, but I did understand that there was additional money that was proposed to be put into the state budget for snow removal last year that was actually vetoed. So I think that we want to make sure that if our snow response, we're putting a lot of effort into it, that the state is also for theirs, because we have a lot of state roads, obviously, and people tend to blame the municipality regardless of what the jurisdiction is.
So a little quick follow-up. So you're basically asking the state to put more funding into their roads rather than the taxpayers of the Anchorage paying for state roads, because I don't like that idea. I want to see them put more money into their maintenance, and I want to see them do better on their job. They do a fantastic job. It's just that it's overwhelming, and their budget hasn't increased, and they're behind the Powerball. So, okay.
Yeah. Yes. Correct. Absolutely. That's what we want.
Thanks. I don't see other folks in the queue at this point. So I'll also ask, I know for better or worse, the way that the state budget is written, the operating budget is that, or the way that the state's structured, I should say, DOT is the South Central region. And I know Mr. Holland, the region director, has presented on that, how it's Anchorage, Mat-Su, Kenai, and then Western Alaska, but mostly airports for there. And so I know what we've heard in the past is that it's really difficult to earmark money, so to speak, for Anchorage. So, Mr. Cloud, I don't know if we have more thoughts on that, or maybe Ms. Breaks on the phone does as well. Like if there's ways that we could really focus on that, or somehow get money more specifically to Anchorage. But I just want to put that on the table. And Mr. Cloud, you can respond, and then I'll ask Ms. Breaks to weigh in as well.
Madam Chair, I was just going to say I would see if Ms. Breaks had an opinion about it. I would have to do more research.
Yeah, Heather, are you there?
Hi, good morning.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, I think that's something that we can talk about and maybe come back with some more information on, either to you, Madam Chair, or the full group.
Okay. Yeah, and that's fine. I think it's just something we need to be aware of, and I think some of it'll probably be legislative strategy, which is what we work on after the program is done as well. But I think that's something we'll want to follow up. And so maybe if we can get an answer, not just to me individually, but if you can send it to myself and Nolan and staff, then we can circulate that around.
Okay, great.
This is Wendy Chamberlain. I'm online too, and I just want to say that sometimes in the rural areas, the co-chairs put in extra money in their region, in DOT's region, like South Central, put in extra money with intent language to say where it's to go to. That doesn't enforce it, but it usually allows it to go there, provided it doesn't get vetoed. That's the way they've been doing it for snow removal and snow in the rural areas.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Chamberlain. Yeah, that's a good point. And then I also see Mr. Johnson in the queue. Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thanks. First, I'd like to ask if there's anyone in the room who doesn't have their mic muted while we're on the phone. Well, the last two speakers, there's a lot of echo. Same here.
Is that
But my question is, and this is actually a question that, yes, thank you. Member Brawley asked, I think a year ago when we were talking about snow and the way DOT splits its resources in the South Central region. And I don't know if it got answered, but it's one that I'd be curious if anyone can dig into. You know, we sounds like that 60 million split between us and the Valley. Is that the way that breaks down? Is that based on, well, I was going to say, it doesn't sound like it's based on population, because if it was, you know, like that, then Anchorage would proportionally receive more. So what's how do they make that determination? Is it on miles of state road they maintain, like miles multiplied lanes or something like that? I guess I'd be curious to see how they make that breakdown. Is it a discretionary exercise that's up to the DOT and the administration? I'd be curious to hear more and see if there's something that seems perhaps inherently inequitable about the way they're managing that.
My understanding, this is Wendy Chamberlain, it's on the miles and then the commissioner has the discretion to adjust it. But Heather and I will put a question in writing on that specific answer to Ryan Anderson and get an answer for you.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, thanks very much. And yeah, I think these are the kinds of things we can chase down, because I think it sounds like we definitely have agreement that that this is a priority, and that it's a matter of figuring out what it would actually look like. So I think this is a good this is work we can continue to do. And then I'll say also, I did reach out to Mr. Volan to ask if there might be any time on the transportation committee agenda next week, since I know some of those folks will be here, not to take a lot of time on the legislative program, but if that's another opportunity to really talk through kind of what the overall strategy around these safe streets are, and to the extent that that intersects with the program. So even if we don't have time for that in the committee, that's up to the chair. But that's another venue we could ask that question. And just checking, I don't see anybody else in the queue at the moment. So any other, I'll just ask one more time. Are there any other kind of comments or reactions to this idea of having these 5 categories, knowing that within that there'll be maybe a smaller number of specific funding asks? Member Branca.
Well, to answer that question, I think I like the idea of these 5. I think that's good. But why I raised my hand is on the homelessness asks. I mean, this is absolutely not fleshed out in any way, but I'm wondering if trying to establish some matching grant for modular housing. I know that HUD has some pilot programs for redevelopment of manufactured housing communities. Maybe having a state ask that they help us with that kind of, that would directly help the homelessness, I would believe, because it'd be cheaper, quick housing. So that was my thought. And then when you, Mr. Clowder, we're talking about blighted properties, and who said maybe first-time home buyer? I can't remember. Okay, so the idea would be that you would, these blighted properties possibly allow a first-time home buyer to come in with a significant discount to take on this house, or I know you guys haven't got details, but I'm curious about that.
Oh, yeah, through the chair. So the blighted properties piece, so two separate pieces here, right? So the blighted properties one, this was something that had, there was a bill and a lot of traction around it in the last session. And it actually may or may not end up in our administration's, request for the program. But the idea was that it would grant local governments the power to designate blight and then to tax it as much as 50% higher than the baseline mill rate. So it's a way to incentivize redevelopment and to discourage properties from being, turning into eyesores essentially. And it had a bunch of details to it. It wasn't supposed to apply to someone's primary residence, but to other kinds of properties. So that was that. And then I believe Member Constant was talking about the idea of offering property tax abatement of a certain number of years for first-time home buyers.
Go ahead, Member Branca.
One thing I think is absent from this in the promote safe streets and trails is, or strengthen behavioral health. Pick your category, but the problem with drugs in Anchorage. If I go through my email, it is just a string of, Jennifer Circle, Defiance, Riviera Trailer Park, Lee Street, Willowa Park, and Little Dipper Park. It just goes on and on, and open drug dealing, and so there's the enforcement piece which seems to be missing, and we, maybe having an ask that we have extra drug enforcement officers in Anchorage funded. I know that we're working on the treatment aspect, but that's another barrier too, is that, and I guess I feel like we can't even get there unless we do some sort of mandatory, it's treatment or jail. But I personally feel like that's one of our biggest issues in crime right now in Anchorage. And so I don't know if we could add some sector. I'm just rambling now, so I'm going to be quiet.
Yeah, thanks. I think that that's a good question. I wonder, Wendy or Heather, if you, I guess that's something we should take back, and I think we can figure out what that might look like. I think the question is, I know there's been over the last few years a lot of law changes around criminal penalties and things like that. So Wendy or Heather, I don't know if you have any idea off the top of your head if there were some changes that were made this session, because I know it hasn't been that much time to implement them. And that's something that we could follow up with too, because I literally have not been tracking, but I know there's been a lot of those changes. So I don't know if you guys have initial thoughts on that.
This is Heather. There was a crime package passed this year, and so we can look into that. I'm not recalling that provision, but I will look into that to let you know.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's definitely a follow-up, and I think that's something we can figure out if there's, because maybe there were some changes that just fully haven't happened yet, and or maybe there's funding requests that are separate from the policy side that we can look at. And Mr. Cloud, I don't know if you have additional thoughts on that, or.
I think that an ask around drugs treatment enforcement, I think, is something that would make a lot of good sense. I don't have a clear picture in my head of what it should be, but I think it makes a lot of sense to craft something.
Oh, okay. And then next, Ms. Ross, you're going to be in the queue.
Thank you. I'm always thinking about how this booklet is most useful to use. And so I really like the direction it's going in with this way of categorizing things. And then I'm recalling that last year we had top 3 priorities, but within them, they each had about 4 or 5 asks. So I really like this idea of grouping it this way and then picking out one, the top 3 of these sub ones, and then really focusing on that, because as Jennifer and I are trying to organize members and respond to legislators, it just gets really hard when we have too many things to ask for and things don't have a champion. And so we're struggling to figure out how to promote things. So I like the direction this is going in. And I think for each of these, we could hopefully just add a short sentence or two and keep this with not much more detail than is here so that we don't have a 16-page booklet again. I think we're really trying to hard to pull out that middle section of 4 pages.
Yeah, thanks. Member Bronca?
So are you meaning like after secure our energy future, there'd be a little blurb of why that's an importance to Anchorage? Or having a blurb after each of these possible?
You're having, probably they each need a little bit more definition, but you pick fund maintenance of state roads. We request the state funds the South Central region $25 million more than their budget, but not much more than that because we don't need to explain the background of how streets are plowed and who maintains what. People kind of know that. So just enough detail to have a pretty specific ask, but not a lot of background in this document. And then picking, let's say the top 3 are road safety corridors, support crisis now, and develop mechanisms through ADA. And the top 3 wouldn't be secure our energy future, promote safe streets, but you would pull the ones out from under there that I think that's what you're thinking about doing.
And then promote safe streets and trails, in some way mentioning our resolution that we're bringing forward with safe streets and trails and the October Road Safety Month and the efforts that we're doing to make our streets safer.
Yeah, in the past, we have put, if there was any resolutions passed, we have put those numbers in. And then it won't happen this session because there won't be bills filed before we publish this. But we'd also put any state bills that were relevant. So when we publish this next time, then we can reference state bills.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add too, during session, and yeah, so the last year's program was in the middle of a 2 years legislature, right? So we had kind of everything that was in play plus everything that got introduced after we published. So we're not in this position now, but I think next year's program we could expect to be more specific again, maybe not longer, but more specific or more targeted. And then just to say also, we try to, and of course we have our lobbyists, and then we're looking to the mayor's office to take a bigger role than in the past couple years around really being active in legislative session strategy, just tracking what's going on. And so I think there will be opportunities to pass resolutions, take positions on things, right? Or just kind of discuss the specific things as they come up. So this is really the broad guardrails, to use the school district's term, around what they advocate for. Okay, well, so now I think we're really into kind of the things underneath these 5 topics. So I don't think we need to belabor and go through every one individually. But if folks want to provide comments, thoughts, questions on any of the, I guess the bold black text under the big red red headers, please get in the queue. And Mr. Cloud, I don't know if you have other things you want to say specifically. I think you walked through kind of what these are, but if there's any additional things as I'm monitoring the queue, please feel free to jump in.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that, as far as like what our top few asks are, it's not at all finalized. I think that, but a couple of possibilities as far as what we might pull out to speak to those. One might be the Crisis Now framework and package to help push that through, because I think it ties in really closely to what are a lot of our police, fire responses and our mobile crisis team and mobile intervention team and what they and the work that they do, and as far as behavioral health needs, I think that having a really strong partnership in a strong program like a Crisis Now could be something that would benefit the city hugely, and probably also something that would even have a fiscal impact on the city. So that's one that's likely. And then also, the community assistance funding is one where I'm always tentative about what's the if we have a strategy for doing it. We have to kind of read the room a little bit on that one, but that's also something that has a lot of big upside potential for the municipality to be able to get that funding. So there's strategy there, but I think it is potentially very important.
Mr. Littlefield, did you want to be in the queue? Okay, never mind. Okay, yeah, I don't see other folks in the queue. If you're on the phone, just please feel free to speak up if I'm missing. And I guess I'll also just ask, because I don't So when I look at it from my perspective, I'm not seeing big things that are missing, but I guess I'll just ask if there's anything that folks want to see on this list that isn't there yet. And then I also see Mr. Johnson in the queue. Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. Question for Ms. Chamberlain. I remember as we were going through this exercise about a year ago, you mentioned from the previous state budget in the capital budget, the percentage of the capital budget that was directed towards Anchorage or Anchorage projects, and it was a startlingly low number relative to our population size. Do you have any updates on what that percentage looked like in last year's capital budget?
Yes, we did very well in last year's capital. And let me just say, is it what we put in or what we ended up with? Because at the end of the day, remember what we ended up with, a lot of our projects were vetoed. Most of our parks projects were vetoed. We had some significant projects vetoed, both for nonprofits and for the municipality. So at the end of the day, when we started off, we always look at a number of about 28% to 30%, realizing that rural areas, even though we're more than half the state's population, realizing that rural areas and that have have to get their wide swath, because we have to take into consideration parts like schools that, like Stebbins had a school burned down, rural schools, water sewer goes into the capital budget that we're not eligible for, village safe water, things like that. So we end up with just real true capital, about 28% of the overall budget. But this year here with the vetoes, that was reduced significantly. So I think Heather and I could look at that and tell you what that was, but we were rather disappointed in the amount we ended up with.
I guess I'd be curious just to know what that is, and certainly, I would not argue that we should get, same funding as everyone else on a per capita basis. But I think the number, like for maybe the year before, I think you said was like 9%, which I would argue seems too low, and at the other end of being unfair to Anchorage and disadvantaging us. So yeah, I'd be curious to know what that is, and if it feels like something that we as a body feels, after the vetoes is lower than really what it should have been, then I don't know, that might be something to consider highlighting in the program. Just throwing it out there as a point to consider potentially.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That actually prompted two different questions I had. And again, I don't see anybody else in the queue at this moment. One is on the port. I think, as we already discussed, we're not necessarily going to the state asking for capital funding for the port at this point. We're pursuing other options, and that's obviously an evolving story. But there has been discussion of a general obligation bond or a GO bond. I don't know if we have an update on that. I don't know if our lobbyists have thoughts on that. Obviously, that's also an evolving conversation. But I guess I'm just wondering the logic of, do we need to put that in here if that does come to pass, or if we have reasonable expectation, that's where things might go. I know it's speculation. So Mr. Cloud, I don't know if you have an answer, or if Wendy or Heather, you have an answer.
This is Wendy. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Wendy.
I think that depending on what revenue forecast ends up, what the December governor's budget posts revenue on, and then the amount of, if we have excess, and then the amount every year in session, they do a full presentation on what our bond obligation is for the state in all areas, and how much room we have in bonding authority, and what that would look like with cost of bonds, how much room we'd have, 400, 500, 600 million to bond. But again, it all depends on that revenue number, whether it's high or whether it's low. And then they're reluctant to go in and issue bonds if we don't have quite a bit of room in there for bonding, and the revenue picture is looking bright. And when you look at what they predict oil to be moving forward for the next couple of years, it's not until like 2029 do they look like having oil go, the number in our revenue from oil go up based on what's coming online. So every year we look at bonding. I don't think it needs to go into the book, because the minute that bonding moves or goes to move, our Anchorage legislators will be all over that.
Yeah, and this is Heather. I would just add that, echoing Wendy's comments, a general obligation bond would not be likely, not passed until the second legislative session of this legislature, because it would have to go on to that next general election ballot. However, having said that, I have heard some comments made recently about an energy bond bill possibly coming forward. But again, if they're GEO bond bills, those wouldn't go on to before the voters for 2 years. So I think, if we think that's coming, we can always, as Wendy said, our legislators are going to be right in there in that mix. And we could include it in next year's program if we think that's going to move.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's very helpful context and a good point. And Mr. Cloud, I don't know if you have comments on that or not.
No, I was actually just going to defer to Wendy and Heather on it. So that's it for me.
Great. Then another question that I had is around parks, and I think that's it is a good flag that that a lot of our projects in Anchorage, a lot of them, the Park Foundation got vetoed, unfortunately, even though we were successful in getting them in the program. And I also know, so right now I'm not seeing something about parks in promote safe streets and trails. Of course, the trails part of it is the nexus with parks. But I know also a lot of our district level member priorities tend to be localized things like parks and road projects. So I guess I just want to raise the question, do we feel like that should be a high priority? Of course, we all love our trails, right? But is that something that we put at the high level, or is it something that we leave more for localized projects? And I guess I'll also note that we know there was a number of Alaska Long Trail projects, some of which would go within the municipality, some of which are outside the municipality. A lot of those also got vetoed, but we know there's a lot of advocacy effort there. So I just want to put kind of that discussion on the table, and I'll turn to Mr. Clouda, and then if folks want to weigh in.
Sure. Madam Chair, one of the things that we're talking about is a measure that would allow us, like with the Chugach access area, something that would allow us to bond for a project that's in a state park land. So that could be improvements to access, Chugach State Park, for example. That's something that would require some legislation, for instance. So that's one item. But otherwise, we don't have at this point a lot of parks related asks that have been brought to us through Parks and Rec as a department. We can look into that a little bit more, but at this point we don't. Beyond that, but I think that's something that members who have more specific ideas about what's in their districts that can bring forth. I think that would be a good avenue.
Ms. Branca?
So I know, as part of safe trails, a lot of our trails in Anchorage are very deteriorated, and it almost, I regularly get pictures of, giant hunks of pavement missing from trails. And, it seems like we're waiting for a big accident to happen before we address that issue. But I would love to see that, as well as Member Martinez and was doing the e-bike ordinance. And we talked about there are some real pinch points in our trail system, including Westchester Lagoon area, where there's so many people walking and biking, and maybe there are some areas of our trail system that should be wider just because the usage is much different than we ever imagined it. And we also talked about signage and striping, keeping people on the right side of the trail. So I feel like there is a lot of trail expense that could be asked for to make our trails safer for all.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I'll add also a project that it's real expensive, so I don't know if it's on anybody's priority list, but shoring up in my district, Point Warren's off and the bluffs, it's looking real bad there. So, and I know that's complicated because it's on airport land, but I think that's something that probably elevates well above the something that we can bond for, right? Or pay for at a local level. So, yeah, I think that's probably something we should follow up is that conversation about trails and what we're asking the state. And then I'm going to ask maybe Mr. Clouda and I can follow up and meet with Anchorage Parks Foundation and Parks and Rec and just have a conversation too about what those priorities look like, not instead of members' district priorities, but in addition to, so that we can coordinate our strategy. Okay, any other comments? I know we have about 30 minutes left. I'm feeling like we're not going to need that 30 minutes, but just seeing if there's other topics people want to bring up, things that are missing from this list, or things that you want to respond to or suggest. Ms. Branca?
So I just wanted to ask, the Strengthen Crisis Now, so Crisis Now isn't open yet, is that correct? The building at Providence that you go and you sit in the recliner and you de-escalate. I thought that was the Crisis Now. And so are you thinking there's going to need to be better contributions each year to keep that facility open, or expanding the model to have another facility?
Sure. And I'm not deeply fluent in all the aspects of Crisis Now. We do have a couple of folks in the mayor's office who are, Farina Brown and Thea Agnew Bemben know a lot about this stuff. And so I defer to them on most of it. My understanding, though, is that for Crisis Now to reach its full potential and to really be built out as a functioning program, they have a list of legislative asks that need to happen. And they're not necessarily about the state funding things, but they have to do with the way that Medicaid reimbursements work and a few other things like that. The 988 phone line system, and like a handful of things that really need to be addressed before it can really work the way that it's intended to. I can get, and we can get more information about that. We've got some great folks on the 8th floor that know a lot about it.
I appreciate the clarification.
Ms. Ross, did you?
Just to clarify further, Crisis Now is a statewide program that deals with all the things he mentioned, whereas I don't know what Providence is theirs called Crisis Now? I think there's just Crisis Stabilization Center.
I believe that Crisis Now is a program of Providence Behavioral Health Services, is my understanding of how it works.
So maybe I can clarify a little bit from my prior role.
Hold on. Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Constance.
that's not an accurate statement. Yeah, thank you. The Crisis Now is a statewide movement. Crisis Stabilization Services, part of the Crisis Now system, are being stepped up at Providence, at South Central Foundation, and a number of locations. But yeah, the Crisis Now is a broad movement across the state.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, and I think it also has nexus with our first responders. So mobile crisis team is obviously something that we have at the
Exactly.
city. Yeah, so I think it's talking about the broad model, but then within that, we want to be specific of what we're asking for or supporting. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone in the queue, so I think the next step then is if you do have thoughts, questions, or something that you would like to add on these topics, we are actively working on it. I'm going to ask Ms. Venneklassen again to send out the draft legislative program after this, and then again, we want to make sure, because this is something we vote on, so don't tell me all of your priorities. Make sure that they go through staff and to Mr. Clouda. I want to spend just a couple minutes on the district priorities. And first, I'm just going to have Ms. Venneklassen share the process that we've been using so far, just to clarify, and then also to make space if there are members who want to talk about your priorities or if you have questions. So Ms. Venneklassen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I sent out an email to each of the district reps with you and your counterpart, sending you last year's priorities. It's been a tradition, at least over the past couple of years, to just defer to members on what you want in the list of district priorities. The caveats being we're asking everyone to really try to limit it to no more than 5 or maybe 6 priorities, because as been said, we're working diligently this year to create a smaller program with really targeted asks. And then the other part of that is we're asking you to please, the priorities that you put forward, to make sure that they're reflected in the CIB or CIP, because we want to make sure it's feasible and that those two align. So if you could please get back to me, some of you already have, thank you, with your list of district priorities. Maybe by the end of next week would be great, and we'll plug them into the draft.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Constant, you're in the queue.
Yeah, thanks. So Jennifer, I saw the list that was circulated and you dropped ours down to 3. And I think I would like to ask to have just one more put back, and that's the Westchester Lagoon one. Otherwise, I think both Daniel and I are happy.
Thank you. Noted.
Thank you. Other comments on district priorities or any questions? Ms. Branca?
This isn't exactly about that, except I was talking with, I had a heck of a time getting the list from Russian Jack Community Council. And she goes, I never saw a request for a CIP list. And she ended up telling me, I said, well, I think it says community council survey. And she goes, oh, I saw that. I wasn't going to take a survey. She thought it was like a survey. So I was thinking somehow maybe renaming to think about council priorities, something that is easier to flag, because I do admit community council survey sounds funny.
Ms. Ross?
Unfortunately, we don't get to touch that. That's OMB's project, but they've been very amenable in the past to working, and they did do some things last year to improve it. And I think just with OMB just starting a month ago with the new director and then having to come up with a budget, they haven't had to touch that or haven't had time to touch that. But yeah, that would be great. So hopefully we can continue to improve that once OMB gets the budget done. We can work with them on that. And then we've been working with the Federation of Community Councils to make sure that they have the one meeting with all the presidents, that they really emphasize that, make sure everyone's aware of it.
Yeah, thanks. And I think this is where the legislative program touches other processes. The CIP list, for example, is in our capital budget. So we're going to be actively looking at this alongside what we're asking for the state. And the CIP community input process, I think, is another kind of in progress improvement project. So I think we have what we have right now for this particular budget season from community councils, but we're actively looking for improving that process. Okay, well, thanks for covering that. So again, I'll reiterate with the district priorities. My goal as someone kind of shepherding this project along is to not be picking these myself. So we're really going to defer to each district, I think. And then if there does need to be a conversation, I'm going to look to the administration if you all have heartburn about one of these or want to change it. I think that needs to be a negotiation kind of in that space, but want to make sure everybody's represented here. And then just a reminder too, as we go through the budget process, the CIP list is, and the CIB, the 1-year budget, that is what also informs that state column. And so we'll make sure that those are matching up as best we can. And then of course, just a reminder for capital projects, it is different than a bill at the legislature because you need to have what's called a CAPSIS request. And so that is why we are trying to connect our CIP list with what's in this program, because that's the mechanism to actually get proposed budget amendments in the system at the legislative level, state legislative level. So that's the goal. Any other comments on districts? Again, check in, don't see anybody on the phone. Okay. Well, then I think we can spend a couple minutes talking about our next steps for the program. Again, we are moving toward getting this introduced. There is still, of course, ample time to provide feedback on this draft. And maybe I'll turn it over to Mr. Clauda and our staff as far as what we hope to accomplish before the next meeting.
And when is the next meeting? I'm sorry.
So the next meeting is, I believe it's November 7th. I think that's a Wednesday, 11 a.m. to noon.
Okay, and a question, Chair Brawley, is would it be helpful if we planned on having our draft more fully fleshed out program on the table for that meeting? Would that be like to have an actual, like it'd be close? I mean, at that point, I think we would have a pretty complete list, maybe for the assembly to review. Would you like to have that be the timeline for it?
Yes, I believe that's the goal, and to
Yes.
the extent we can, because I think we talked through the high level things.
Right.
We're adding some text, but yeah, I think the goal is then to have one more opportunity within this committee to fully review that, along with members being able to provide feedback outside of it, and then we can move toward actual introduction on the agenda.
Okay.
I think it'd be really nice to have a near final text draft at the November meeting. So I think the division of labor we decided on is you're doing a lot of the text and then we're doing the design. So, and then I think it needs to, are we trying to improve it at the last meeting in November?
So I think so the code says we have to introduce the legislative program before we pass the budget. So if we are passing the budget on the 19th, we need to make sure it's on the agenda for the 19th. I think if we feel like it's ready to go and members don't have issues with it and everything, then we could in theory pass it on the 19th. Otherwise, our next opportunity is December 3rd. And I think that would be if there's maybe things that are still really in progress or unknown, or there's reasons to hold, but I think that's our timeline.
Yes, we'll definitely want an almost final draft from you, and then members can make final tweaks, and then Ally can put it into the formatted version for introduction on the 19th, and hopefully passage so that we can print it before the legislative luncheon in December.
Sure. Yeah, that timeline works great for us. We should have it easily by then.
Okay, so yeah,
Madam
we'll
Chair.
have, was there somebody on the phone?
Madam Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So I just want to put a caveat down on all of that talk about timelines and getting things done. It's great to have a majority of the work done, but it shouldn't constrain members, the body's ability to add, subtract, to amend the CIP due to late breaking topics that happen on the 19th. And so I think Ms. Brawley's timeline of thinking it through the 3rd of December, that meeting is not unwise, only because there shouldn't be pressure from the technical side saying, well, we're running out of time, so we shouldn't do these things. Members need to be able to fully use the time for the budget to explore all of the fine details.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Constant. That's a good point. So I think we will know that it'll be introduced on the 19th, and then we can kind of play it by ear, especially because we know our agendas are very stacked with other things as well. So if we have to let it slip or there's good reason, and of course, as he said, members do have the prerogative to make amendments, including the night of, and I believe, I don't remember if we did that this last year, but that's part of the process, so we can plan for that. Okay, well, I think then that sounds like a good plan. So again, we'll get the draft out to everybody, to all members, because we want folks to have a look at it. Please get your feedback. I guess we can put a deadline on it, but we want to have it well before having a final draft or text draft of this for review on the meeting it's actually Thursday, November 7th. I misspoke. And that's on our agenda. The one other thing I want to do very briefly, and then we can see if there's any folks who want to give public comment, is Ms. Ross, if you could just give a very brief update on, you mentioned the legislative lunch. So if you could just spend a minute kind of sharing what we know about that so far. Or Mr. Cloud, either one.
I'll give the history of how it's been done in the past. Typically, the mayor hosts a legislative luncheon in December. The last few years, it's been at the Denina Center. The mayor presents the city's package. The 2 years ago was more, or a couple of years ago was more of a lecture at the legislature. And then this one, I think maybe some of you went, it was more of a round, there's a presentation, but it's a little bit more of a roundtable discussion. And then over the past couple of years, the Assembly has been then hosting a dinner during session for the Anchorage delegation with the people who go down for the AML conference, as kind of a way to follow up on the first one. So we'll continue to oversee the session, dinner, and then the mayor's office. I can let you speak about the luncheon.
Sure. Yes. So we definitely are needing to firm up our plans as far as a legislative luncheon, but we should have an update for this group soon about that. We would like to have it. I think it is an important thing to do. So we're going to need to make some decisions pretty fast about the windows of opportunity for doing it.
Thank you. Yeah, and so that's just in progress, but just a heads up for members. And thanks to those who attended last year. It's a good opportunity to talk with legislators. And we know regardless of the outcome of the election this year, there will be some new folks in that room, just based on open seats and so on. So I think it's always good to build relationships. So, so more on that to come. With that, I think we have done all of our business. I guess I will just briefly ask if any members have any updates under unfinished business, federal, state, local, or district priorities that you want to bring up. So I'll give a space for that for a second. Okay, not seeing any right now. And I know, of course, there's election time going on, so there's people are focused on other things in terms of federal and state leadership. So lastly, I will see if there's any members in the audience who would like to give audience participation. I do see one, so thank you for coming. If you'd like to come up, speak into the microphone, and then you have 3 minutes. So go ahead when you're ready.
Well, could you hear me if I just? Yeah, this one's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Miss Sophia O'Neill, and I am a resident of Eagle River. Okay. The support of law enforcement wanes on the pretense of they, them, and all. To verbally abuse or politically sacrifice those that serve day after day, may I remind everyone, they volunteer to go out and face that which you cannot, and for anyone to then publicly eviscerate any mistake, even before facts are present. How is it that names are released in this day and age, even before an investigation is complete? So when you serve, not only do you have to carry silently that worry about the unpredictability of the public and the unknown, but also public figures and representatives publicly jumping to conclusions or condemnation. Public safety is forced to cope with the threatening of careers along with daily job stress. Words coming from public figures add legitimacy to they, them, and all mentality of condemnation. And that's condemnation before guilt or innocence is found. Using the threat of lack of funding as a punishment causes discourse and hurts morale, and to actually defund would only harm efficiency in the future. What isn't maintained now then becomes systemic upkeep for years and is an endangerment to all those that serve you every day. The reality, your ranks in public safety are low. The choice to leave or not join a profession, which used to be for a lifetime, is created not due to lack of heart, but soul-crushing lack of support. Too many take for granted those from the entire of society that have stepped up and volunteered. It's time society as a whole reevaluate and become realistic about who your true heroes are. And remember, they are human and some have families. It is not your right to project they, them, all mentality or the mental stress of guilt before innocence, yet it is done every day. And those that serve shoulder this each day, not knowing what that day may bring. I see you, and I thank you for your service. Thank you.
All right, thank you for participating. I don't see any other members of the public here to give comment. So I think unless there's any other business, I think we can adjourn. So we are adjourned. Thank you.